Hi, my name is Sheila Olior Barrios, and I am a therapist. I'm a psychologist. And when I was asked to speak about sexuality, I actually thought about, you know, identity first. And this is a topic that maybe might seem unrelated, but as we study, we're going to realize that it's actually very important to know how our identity is rooted in Christ. So the Bible verse that I actually picked, it's found in Genesis 26 and 27. And this is why this sexuality topic is called In His Image. Because in Genesis it says, Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and all over the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. So we're going to study what does it mean to be made in the image of God and how that's related to our sexuality. So first of all, we need to talk about identity. And these are the words that the questions that I kind of picked out to kind of define what our identity is. When someone asks you, who are you? What do you believe in? How do you behave? And why do you behave the way that you behave? And what defines your moral judgment? Those are all questions that have to do with our identity. And as leaders, we need to understand what that means, because if we have someone in our church, maybe a teenager, maybe a young adult, or maybe parents that need to teach their children about sexuality, we need to understand first what it means to be made in the image of God, and to have those concepts clear in order to be able to talk about something so important as our sexuality. So basically, when we talk about moral judgment, which means what our moral judgment is what determines what we think is wrong from right? It's that moral compass that we have. And so right now in our society, we have so many things that determine moral judgment. And as Christians, we should be able to base that moral judgment in the Bible. But how does it even look like, right? And when I was actually studying developmental psychology, I remember reading Erik Erikson, and I really loved the way that he describes the stages of our development. And he talks about different stages that we go through. And in each stage, we have like a goal that we should be able to achieve, right? These stages are not correlated. So it doesn't mean, like, if you can achieve a goal in one stage, doesn't mean that you're not going to go to the next stage. So, for example, one stage will be when we're born. The first thing he says that we need to achieve as a goal when we're babies is the stage that's called trust versus mistrust. So the baby needs to learn how to trust that the parents are going to be able to provide the food and the shelter and the protection that they need. So if they don't have that kind of attachment, secure attachment with their parents, it's going to affect them in the future with the future attachments they have. And so there's different kind of goals that we have in stages. And I remember that there was one stage that was actually correlated to the next one. Just two stages are correlated, and it's the teenage years with the young adult stage, right? Those at the adolescents and young adults are correlated. And why is that correlation there? And so this is the interesting part. So Erik Erikson says that when we're teenagers, we are figuring out who we are, right? So the end goal of adolescence is to know who you are, to have your own identity. So we see that always, happening. We see teenagers kind of going out to the world and creating a lot of groups of friends, and they're always trying to kind of find where they belong. And so they fall into the peer pressure and all those things because they want to find themselves. So they're looking for the definition of who they are in everyone else, and everyone's opinion of who they are. And so we see kind of that interaction between them. And I was, when I would teach teens at church, I remember that I will always remind them, remember that you're looking out to your peers for their validation on who you are, but they're also doing the same thing. So nobody actually decides what is what, and who is what, and what is cool and what is not. And that's the ironic thing about it. They're all looking outside to find themselves. And then, sadly, in our society, they end up being defined by the things that they admire and the things they watch. And right now, maybe it could be influencers, it could be people on TV, unless they have young adults maybe that they can look up to at church. And, in parentheses, this is why it's so important to have young adults active in the church as leaders, as people they can look up to, because they're looking for, that place of belonging, and they're looking up to find someone they can admire and they can be like. And so in this stage, they're basically trying to find themselves, and it will be ideal for them to not, waste their time trying to be in relationships and actually take that stage to look inside and to really figure out who they are and what they want and what God wants for their life. We're going to talk a little bit about that specific topic in the future. But basically, when we can consider that they reach the goals when they know who they are. Now, why is this correlated to the young adults stage? And it's because young adults, when they know who they are, they want to have, their goal of their stage is to have intimacy. So when they grow, teenagers grow, what we see is a tendency of having less friends, not looking for the big crowds anymore, and just looking for that, 2 or 3 people that they can truly, truly trust to have intimacy with. That best friend that never failed you or accepts you unconditionally, and so we often see that in maybe the college age, stage where they're talking about, the hypocrites and how I'm tired of this. And so they're kind of filtering out their relationships and getting rid of the people that are just superficial friends. So whenever they come into young adulthood, they start looking for that special someone that they can share their life with, because that's their need. Their need is to have intimacy. So Erickson actually says that true intimacy cannot exist if the people in the relationship don't know who they are, right? And so this is one of the biggest problems I think that we see in society nowadays, is that people don't know who they are. And they're still going to relationships, trying to find intimacy, and they can't find it. They can't truly have real intimacy with someone. So when things fail, or when I'm unhappy, or this relationship is not giving me the type of pleasure or happiness that I wanted, then the first thing I do is just toss the person and look for someone else that is going to fill that void that I have inside, when that void can't be filled by anyone else but yourself. That is the void that you should be filling with your own identity. And we sadly go from relationship to relationship trying to find people that are going to make us feel, complete and whole, and we cannot find it. Or maybe we have kids that grow up and they have this long relationship while they're adolescents, right? And they go to college and then maybe they break up. But then they never find that person that makes them feel whole. And why? Because they actually, they were dating when they were teenagers, and they configured that identity with the other person. So they're so used to that other person that when they're apart, either they do fall apart, or they try to feel with other people that never make them feel that way. So they keep on coming back to the original person, even if it's the wrong person and they know it, in this cycle of toxic relationships, because every time I'm with them, even though it's bad, I still feel like I'm like myself again. So it's very important to know, why relationships when we're younger are not that recommended, just because we're not there emotionally, we're not there psychologically, we're not ready for that kind of commitment. We're trying to figure ourselves out. So if you do have, like, maybe when you're working, teenagers that come and ask you what you think about dating when you're young, I always, like, I don't want to say no, like, rather than no, you shouldn't, because this is gonna happen. Like, kids are gonna like each other, they're gonna have little relationships, and they're gonna, kind of want that, and so you can't really, like, stop it completely. But it's good to have those tools to explain to them why it could be something that in the long run wouldn't be the best thing for them, and maybe let them decide if that's what they want to go through or not. Like, and the beautiful thing about teenagers, and I love working with teenagers, is that they're in that stage, they're learning, and they're questioning, and they're seeing the gray areas of life. So they really need to understand, like, this is not the moment to say yes, no, black and white. It's more the moment to ask questions, to lead them and to guide them towards their own critical thinking, and for them to be able to go to the Word and to pray and to ask God what God wants for their life, and encourage them to find God's purpose for their life, and, like, guide them towards that. Not be like that person, if you're like a leader, not be that person that, like, imposes their own opinion, but more like the facilitator for them to have their own relationship with God, and kind of guide them towards, the resources, the Bible, and just, to have a better understanding of how relationships work. So moving forward, when we talk about, I don't know why it's looking, right, there you go, intimacy. Usually when we talk about intimacy, we misuse the word. And, many parents sometimes use the word intimacy to talk about sex, right? Because they sometimes don't want to, like, say the words, and they feel a little awkward about it. So they just, like, say things like they were intimate or things like that. And usually, intimacy is associated with sexuality, but intimacy is way more than that. It has, like, a lot of different dimensions, and it starts to be vulnerable. It has aspects that are cognitive and experiential, of course, like there's a lot of physical stuff that comes with it, but there's also a lot of emotional things that come with it. And it doesn't really mean that intimacy is only between partners that are sexually active. You could be intimate with a friend, so how psychologists we are, we kind of want to dissect all the concepts, and we dissected the concept of love, and Stember actually did, and he came up from all the research and the data of a theory that love has 3 dimensions. One of them is intimacy, the other one is passion, and the third one is commitment. So this is someone that is not, Christian. This is a researcher, and so we see that he says, okay, intimacy, he calls intimacy the emotional closeness and the affection, or the affection and connectedness with the other person. Then he talks about passion, and he refers to the physical closeness that could be, like a hug from being friends all the way to sexuality. And then he talks about commitment. And I love the definition that he has of commitment, because he says it's the initial cognition of love and the decision of or determination to maintain it, which is an amazing definition, because we sometimes think that commitment is like just going and, like, signing a piece of paper. And there's a lot of people that don't believe in marriage because they're like, what is the difference for me signing a paper or not signing a paper? It is more than that. A commitment is me realizing the love that I have for this person, and then making the decision to maintain that love. I'm determined to maintain it every single day. So he says that there's different combinations of love, according to the different combinations of this components, right? So he says that when we have no intimacy or no passion and no commitment, there is no love. So if you don't have any of the 3 dimensions, there's no love in the relationship. Then he says if we have intimacy, which is me, like, having that emotional closeness with someone, but there's no passion and no commitment, he calls it liking. When someone's like, oh, I like this person, yes, I have that connection, the emotional connection, but there's no physical stuff going on, and there's also no commitment to that person. Then he says, when there's intimacy, so I like this person, and there's also the physical stuff, there's passion, but there's no commitment, he calls it romantic love. And I know that you're probably right now thinking of all the examples, maybe on shows, on the movies, that you can find this type of loves. Then he calls the infatuated love when there's no intimacy, so there's no emotional connection. There is passion, so there's physical stuff, but there's no commitment. So it's just physical, right? So he calls that infatuated. Then he calls it fatuous when there's no intimacy, but there's passion and commitment. So basically, there's a physical situation happening, there's a commitment, but there's no emotional relationship. Then there's what he calls the empty love, which is when you have no intimacy, so no emotional relationship, you have no physical relationship, no passion, but you have commitment. And then the compassionate love is when you have intimacy, but there's no more passion and there's commitment. So basically, the different types are, maybe it's, when you meet someone, there's nothing there, there's no love. When maybe you start liking that person because you connect with them emotionally, oh, there's liking, In society, as we see it today, we see first the infatuated one, right? Because we see in movies and TV shows, they tell us that I like, and I'm just going to go and have some sex with them or whatever, right? So it's just straight to passion. There's nothing else in passion. And then as we watch the shows and stuff like that, we see that the relationship might progress into some intimacy. Like if maybe the guy likes me enough to stick around and have a little conversation with me, he might realize that there's an emotional connection. I'm a nice girl and he may like me. So maybe I can upgrade from infatuated love to the romantic kind of love, right? And then maybe if we have this relationship going, and then one day he introduces me to his friends and calls me his girlfriend. Hey, now we have some commitment, and maybe someday if he does decide to propose to me, I'm gonna be super surprised because wow, I did not see this coming, and maybe I will get married, which in my opinion is very crazy to me that people would be surprised that someone wants to get married. If you're in a relationship with them, you shouldn't be surprised they're asking you to marriage. You know what I mean? Maybe you're surprised on the way or the moment, but if it's a good relationship, you might know that it's heading somewhere, and you shouldn't be surprised, But that's what we see usually on shows. And then we also see the other side, right? The having that romantic connection and the physical stuff with no commitment, which, we call it friends with benefits, and it's a thing that is more popular than anything right now. But none of them are love, right? Did you realize that none of them have the 3 stages? And then, maybe we see also in shows or in movies, and actually in real life, sometimes we see, couples that get married and then they start losing these dimensions. So maybe you have a stage in your life where, I don't know, you have little kids, you're always busy, you're traveling, you're working, and then so there's no more connection, emotional connection, there's no time to talk. And maybe that leads to not having any physical connection either, but there's commitment, right? You're still married, but you're not talking and you're not having sex and you're not being affectionate with each other. Maybe the stage can change, and maybe you start having a little more emotional intimacy and commitment, but there's no physical intimacy, and then you kind of move forward to the compassionate kind of love, or maybe it's an old couple that is just, they're not interested in having the physical stuff, and they just want to be friends forever and be committed to each other, and that could be the compassionate love. And then suddenly there's sometimes the empty love kind of takes over, and then at the end of the day, the commitment kind of dies out. So, it doesn't mean that if you have one kind of love, you can't move into the stages and kind of get all of the dimensions, right? So maybe it's a moment, if you're watching and you're kind of thinking, what's wrong with a marriage? Maybe this is a moment to kind of look at these dimensions and say, hey, what's missing? What's missing so that I can feel this consummate love that Stenberg talks about, which is when we have the three of them, is what we want. You know, we want to be intimate, and we want to be passionate, and we want to be committed to someone. That's how we were created. And how do we know that we were created this way? And so when we look at the Bible, we find in the Bible different words that define what we call love, right? And this is like a little bit of the problems we have with translations, right? Each culture has a set of words to describe love, or anything for that matter. So if you don't have the word to describe something, you might not even know that it exists. So in Hebrew, there's different words to say love. And each kind of word has a different way of loving. Here in English, we might have I care for you, kind of close to love, or I love you. We don't have many, right? You know, I'm Latino. In Latinos, we have like 2 or 3 different ways of saying that. You know, so there's like different stages where like, I love you like a friend, I love you, and then there's the te quiero, and then there's the I love you, like I want to marry you, love you, like intense, love you, te amo, right? But in the English language, we don't have that many ways. So that's why it's so important in movies when we say, oh, they said I love you, right? Because it's like the ultimate thing you can say. But in Hebrew, there's many words, and 3 of them, and there's more than that, 3 of them actually have like they correlate with this dimension that Stenberg found, which doesn't surprise me because obviously God created psychology, and we found this in the research, but it was all in the Bible all along, right? In the Bible, it's translated to the word love. So we kind of miss that in translation. But, you know, when, for example, in the verse where Jesus is talking to Peter and he's asking Peter, Peter, do you love me? And he says, yes, Jesus, I love you. Okay, then take care of my sheep. Do you love me? He keeps on asking it. He asks 3 times that question. And we kind of read it and we're like, come on, Jesus, do you not believe, Peter? Like, why do you keep on asking? You know, it's because he wasn't saying, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? He was using these different words to describe the love. So he was asking in different levels, right? He was saying at first, do you rasha me? Which is the intimacy kind, the emotional closeness of type of love. And he said, yes, I do. I rasha you. Okay, but do you like ahava me? Right? And so he kind of like starts going, and we also have that word agape love. We know different words that are used in the Hebrew language, right? And so we have the dod, that is the word of love that is used in songs of songs, is it? So is when Solomon is talking about sexuality specifically, and that kind of love, he uses the word dod because he's talking about that physical closeness, or like, and specifically sex, right? And ahava is more the deeper, committed intimacy that God wants to have with us, you know, where he's at the core of who we are. That's the type of love that is ahava. And then agape, if I'm not mistaken, is the type of love from a father and a son, if I'm not mistaken. And so this is why we come to the Genesis 1:26 to 27, where it says, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So what does it mean to be made in the image of God? So what we know from the Bible is that God is Father, Holy Spirit, and Son, or Jesus, right? We know that it's a Trinity. We know that it's 3 in 1. And usually when we're growing up, you know, we go to maybe Sabbath school, and they show us like the 3 matches. Well, at least in Argentina they did that. I don't know if they do it here in the U.S., which now I think about it is a little bit dangerous. With 3 little matches, and then you join them together and make one flame, to kind of explain how 3 different beings can be one at the same time. So, you know, we know this about the image of God. And what do we know about human beings? You know, when we study philosophy, this is the question that we always ask, you know, who are we? And so even through philosophy and psychology and everything, we have realized that we do have components, right, that make who we are. We have a body, so we have a physical aspect. We have an emotional aspect, which most likely is used like in poems and stuff like that, is used as the word heart. And here I chose the word soul to describe it. And then we have the mind, right? We have the cognitive aspects of who we are. And the three aspects make who we are, one being. And we're all spiritual. We are spiritual beings. There's no such thing as, how's your spiritual life doing? Like that question, like what do you mean, how's my spiritual life? Like, we are spiritual beings. Like, maybe our spirituality or like spiritual life is aligned with God's will or not. It could be or it couldn't be not, but we're still one spiritual being. And the thing about who we are is that sexuality, it's everything, it's everywhere, right? It's like it permeates every single area of our lives. It's emotional, it's cognitive, and it's physical. So that's why sexuality is so important to know about it, like to study it, to be aware of it, and to decide how we're going to handle that in the world. And nowadays, I think that one of the biggest tools that Satan has used to destroy us as human beings is to make us believe that each aspect that we have is separated, that we can do whatever we want with our body and it's not going to affect our emotions or our mind, or that we can do whatever we want with our minds and it's not going to affect our emotions or our body, right? We have so many people that think that they can eat whatever they want and it's not going to affect their mental health, right? Or they can work and work and work and be stressed out and it's not going to affect their body, or it's not going to affect their emotional stability, right? And then they have issues with people and relationships because they're so stressed out, and it trespasses to their emotional aspect. So we have so many ways in which we misuse our aspects. If we keep on living our lives thinking that everything is separated, we are going to ultimately destroy ourselves. We can't think that whatever we do with our body is not going to affect our mind and our emotions. And this is how Satan is trying to destroy us, because he wants us to think that our sexuality has nothing to do with our emotional side or our mental health, when it does. It affects every single area of our lives. For example, one of the biggest issues we have nowadays, or topics that we should be talking about that we're not addressing, is the issue of pornography, right? Nowadays in our society, pornography is something that is super normalized. It's even seen as healthy sometimes. Masturbation is even recommended by some therapists under the umbrella of, exploration and self-care and health and all of that. But the reality is that we're not made to be masturbating. And why is that? I mean, and this is the way that I could explain it maybe to teenagers so they could understand it. I'm gonna tell you how, so you can maybe use it in the future if you need to. When we go to the army, right? Like when a soldier is going to the army to get trained for war, right? What do? So they go and they train. So that means that they repeat one thing over and over and over and over again, so that whenever they're under stress, under fire, or under circumstances that they cannot process fast because everything's just happening, their bodies can respond with the right answer to something they can't even think about, right? So if they, for example, they're training to shoot at some point, right? They're training and they're repeating that so that whenever they're in shock because everything's happening and people are around them and there's just chaos, they can still shoot, right? Or they can still aim, or they can still go to a place and do what they have to do. So it's the same thing with pornography and masturbation, right? If a child or a man or a woman, for that matter, if they're training their body, they're repeating this this movement over and over again, maybe with the stimulation of pornography, right? And they're training their body to respond a certain way to that kind of stimulus. Whenever they're taken out of that context and they're put into a normal relationship, their body might not respond the way they want it to respond. So you have people that you have kids that have been watching pornography for years and they've been masturbating for years, and then when they want to have a real relationship where they have to actually have sex, with their partner, they can't, maintain an erection because they don't have the pornography. They have to be thinking about it. They have to be looking at it, or they have to do this certain movements. And sometimes, and we see that a lot, with teenagers that are suffering, like that guys pretend girls to do, like they expect girls to do certain things that they've seen in pornography, for them to be turned on. And then they get mad if they don't, if they can't have it, or they get mad if they don't find the answers from the girl side that they would be looking for, because they think that's how it is. And so, besides of the fact that pornography itself, really teaches kids a very unhealthy way of a sexuality, what it is and how it actually looks like, very unrealistic. Even if they're not using pornography to masturbate, the masturbation alone is basically training their body to respond to a certain stimulus in a certain way. So whenever they want to change it up, we find issues with that. And then we see a lot of couples coming to therapy because they don't know why they can't have sex. And there's a lot of issues that come with it, and a lot of shame. And it's very hard for someone to even and especially men, to even talk about this, to even get to therapy because of this. So there's a lot of frustrations in marriages. And same with women. I mean, I'm always people laugh when I talk about this, but we, with all this feminism that's coming up, and it's just this issue of masturbation is rising. And then, men, real men can't compete with a toy, right? This is not realistic. So when you find, when we are creating humans, as a society, when I say, and maybe our kids and stuff like that, that grow up just thinking that sexuality, the point of sexuality is just to have pleasure, to have my pleasure, self-pleasure, right? Then we're not teaching them the correct way. I mean, God created sexuality to be able to enjoy, between two people, right? And it's not about me getting pleasure. It's about me being able to connect with the other person in all of my levels. It's able to connect emotionally and cognitively, or rationally speaking. And the physical aspect as well is for me to unite with them, to be intimate, to be vulnerable, to be at that moment of union, and to think of the other person. It's not about me getting what I want and me just being pleasured and then tossing you aside. And because we have divided these aspects, we have materialized sexuality as just me getting pleasure. And whenever you're not giving that to me, then I'm going to do it on my own, and it just becomes a very individualistic thing, just like a self-serving thing, which is not the way. This is not the way. Even just any kind of self-pleasure is not the way, right? Even food, right? That's not the way. God didn't make food for us to use it as the main source of pleasure in our lives. Yes, it is joyful to be able to eat. We know we like it. We like certain things to eat and stuff. But if we're depending on food to give us the pleasure we need and the happiness, and we're stress eating or we're emotionally eating all the time, then we're placing food as the center of our lives. And the whatever food is providing to us, God should be providing to us. And same with sexuality. God didn't create sexuality just to serve as a self-pleasure type of thing, And the problem with specifically sexuality is that because it affects all of our areas, if it's not used correctly, or if it's not channeled correctly, it can really, really take us to the wrong path. Because it could be something that's very liberating, and it can be very empowering if it's in the right place, in God's hands, in the right context. Or it can really, really take our focus off of everything else and consume us. This is why, Paul, in the Bible says, hey, if you can work for God and not be married and abstain from that, then do it, right? But if you cannot, then go ahead and get married. And why does he say that, right? Because because sexuality does take over our brain and shifts the focus, and how many times that has happened in a relationship, where before you started having sex, we would talk so much. And then suddenly now the physical aspect comes in and takes over, and that's all we want to do, or that's like, now it's been replaced. The whole conversation aspect of the relationship is being replaced. And this is why, whenever you're dating, it's so important to abstain a little bit from that physical aspect, because you want to get to know the other person before the hormones come in and take over your brain and then blind you. Because sex can make two people that are very incompatible to be compatible for a moment, for the moment you're having sex. And then if you go into a relationship straight to that, you're going to miss all the red flags because you're so infatuated with all the hormones that are just happening and they're just flowing and everything's amazing. And sadly, there's a lot of people that actually get committed and like get married in a stage where they're still infatuated with the other person. And then after they're married, all the hormones start kind of coming down, and now this person, not so exciting anymore. They're not that new to me anymore. And I start seeing everything that bothers me about them, and we started bickering, and now the physical tension is not there anymore like it used to be, and all the conflicts rise up, and then that's when we kind of let go and we had to switch, because there's more exciting people out there, and there's always going to be more exciting people out there, right? So to end, like the last triangle we can see here is the last one is the concept of matrimony, and that's why God that is between female, male, and God. That is why the institution of marriage is so important. And sometimes we don't really understand what the Bible says about it, and we misuse it to judge other people. But basically, we need to understand that we are reflecting the image of God when we're married. So we have a lot of responsibility to our children and the people around us on how we behave or how we treat our spouse. Because we should be, showing our kids the image of God in our relationship. And that doesn't mean that you can't reflect the image of God when you're alone, because that is exactly who we are. We are made in the image of God. So when we have all of these areas balanced, when we understand the interaction between them, then we do reflect the image of God. And how big is that responsibility that we have? When we're actually connected and see ourselves like a whole being, instead of being so separated in this, and different parts, and just acting away with our bodies, and at the same time saying something and then not paying attention to the emotional stuff, and just being irresponsible with the people around us in the emotional aspect. Which I can give a million examples on how it looks like when you're just paying attention to the emotional side and not the mind, or just the mind and not the body or the emotions. And there's so many consequences when we're just when we're just choosing one aspect and kind of like prioritizing it, right? For example, if I'm only prioritizing my emotional aspect, my life is going to be a roller coaster, because if I'm always deciding things in an emotional way, then one day I feel like this, and then the other one I don't. So one day I'm mad at you and forget you, and then the next day I'm in love with you and come back to me. And so we are not emotionally responsible. Or if we're not taking the emotional side into consideration and we're only cognitive and rational, we hurt people, because we don't have empathy for them. So when something doesn't make sense and we don't include the emotional aspect, we just make decisions, and it is what it is, right? Or we break our own hearts because we make decisions based only on what we want for our lives, and we don't pay attention to the emotional side, and then we maybe miss out on the opportunity of the person that was actually right for us, because it didn't fit in our mental picture that we had at the moment. So yeah, we have that responsibility, not only as human beings, but also as a matrimony, to reflect the image of God. That is what it means to be in the image of God. And when we teach our children, we need to understand it ourselves. We cannot teach our children about sex or sexuality, healthy sexuality, if we don't practice it ourselves, if we don't understand these concepts ourselves. That is the best way of teaching children about sexuality. just being healthy, sexually healthy, and being aware of the responsibility that we have, when we decide things with it. I see so many, kids and families that sometimes, maybe they get a divorce and stuff like that, and then the parents start acting in different ways. Maybe before they got married, they were told that if they were virgins when they got married, everything was going to be all right. And that's why maybe in the past it was the only thing preached. No, you have to be a virgin until you get married. They wouldn't preach purity of mind, purity of not only body, but mind and emotion. They would just teach, just be virgin. And then they get to the marriage and they were virgins, but then the marriage falls apart, right? And it's not a formula. It's not something that, oh my gosh, if you do all these things, you're going to have a successful marriage. It is not like that. And when teenagers come up to you and they're like, well, I already have sex. What am I going to do now? I already failed at this. That doesn't matter. God can repair. And the only thing that is different between a person that was sexually active before marriage and after marriage is the baggage that they bring with them to the marriage, to the relationship. It's kind of like, for example, I have a genetic predisposition to get fat, right? To be overweight, right? And my sister has the same DNA or like the same, background, but she doesn't. So she can eat whatever she wants, and she won't be overweight, and I can think about food and I gain weight, right? Which is very unfair. But I always look at her, I'm like, man, like I want her genes. Like what happened to me? So what happens? Like in order to be in the same place as she is and in my weight, if I want to have a healthy weight, I have to work out. I have to limit my desserts. I need to be always counting my calories and seeing what I'm eating. And then people look at me and look at her, and we probably look the same way, very healthy. That's it, right? And she, on the other hand, doesn't do that. She eats whatever she wants. She doesn't work out, and she still looks like me, right? It's unfair, but that's how life is. It's the same thing with our sexuality. So if I have a history of a lot of, different partners and early experiences and maybe concepts that I've learned around in throughout my life on like wrong concepts that I've learned with sexuality, when I am married, it's going to take more work for me to have a healthier marriage because I have more factors that are affecting me. And someone that didn't have all those experiences and maybe got married, maybe they were virgins, maybe they didn't have a lot of, partners in the past, or maybe their heart wasn't broken as mine was, they have higher probability of having a healthy marriage without so much work. It doesn't mean that we both won't have a healthy marriage. It doesn't mean that we can be successful. It just means that I'm going to have to work more at it because I have more things that I'm bringing to it. And my sister maybe hasn't. She has a very happy and successful marriage, and she doesn't have to put so much work in it. So whenever we're looking at this, we have to decide, and especially when we're talking to teenagers, what do you want to take into your future marriage and to your future family? Do you want to take all of these broken stories and trust me, and this is, I remember a friend of mine in college, he was one of those party boys, everyone knew him. He was very sexually active with lots of girls for 10 years because he was in med school. So he was there for 10 years. And I remember talking to him, he was 30 something. And this is a grown man. And he was crying that day. And I was way younger than him and I didn't really understand what was going on. But he was crying. He was telling me, Shay, you have no idea. Now that I'm older, I look back and I see that every single thing that I've done, every girl that I was with, every kiss that I gave, everything that I done, I left a part of me there. Everything that I done. And now I want to be with someone. I want to have a good, intimate relationship with them, and I have nothing to give. I feel like I'm empty. And I can't fall in love with the right person. I don't even know what love is, he would tell me, because he was so used to just changing from one girl to the next and never connecting that physical aspect to the emotional aspect of sexuality. It was just physical to him, right? It was, I want it and I'm going to go for it. And there was never that connection. So now he's a 30-something-year-old. He wants to have a good girlfriend and he's trying to date them, but he never falls in love with them because he does not know how to connect that emotional aspect to the physical one. And that's what sadly happens when we're training our bodies, when we're training our minds and our emotions to be separated, and we don't want to fall into that category because it's very hard to go back. There's a lot of work that we have to do. And maybe in the way we hurt a lot of people, including our own children, because sadly some people find out that they have all these issues when they're like 40 and they hit midlife crisis. And then they decide, hey, you know what? The problem might not be me, might be my person. And they just, get a divorce and try to move on. And then there's kids and brokenness and blended families and all those issues. So when you are speaking about sexuality, have all these concepts in mind so that you can give whoever you're talking to the tools to understand how our mind works, how our emotions work, and how our bodies work. It is not about me telling you what you shouldn't be doing. It is not about me opening the Bible and saying, you know what, in this chapter it talks about sexual impurity and immorality. So if you do all this, you're going to be a sinner. We're all sinners. We're all sinners. Sexual sin is right next to lying and stealing. We're all sinners, right? We all need the grace of God, and God offers us second chances, third chances, fourth chances. We have the God of a million chances, right? And it's not to say, oh, I'm going to go out there and do what I want because I always know I can be forgiven. No, it's to give you hope that wherever you are in your life right now, God can repair it. If you surrender to God, He can come and transform your life. He can make you His again and show you what He wants for your life. And He can teach you how to use all of these aspects that you have. They're amazing. I mean, we were created in the image of God. God, it's a God, He's a creator. We have the ability to create, not only by, with our hands and create art and music and poetry, but also we can reproduce. We can create other human beings, right? That is what differentiates us from every other being in this world. So let's take responsibility from that. Let's enjoy that we're made in the image of God and act responsibly with our sexuality. Thank you.